Some fast food chains do not disappear because customers stop showing up. They disappear because a parent company changes its mind, a trademark gets parked, a remodel scares people off, or a boardroom decides one brand is more useful as spare parts for another. That is what makes these 12 lost chains stranger than the usual restaurant failure story. People still drive hours for the last surviving locations. Former customers try to rebuild the food at home from memory. In some cases, the name is quietly being revived, not because nostalgia is cute, but because there is still money hiding in a brand people never forgot. A few of these chains were converted almost overnight into bigger competitors. Others were swallowed during mergers, stripped for real estate, or redesigned so badly that the loyal crowd stopped recognizing the place. One famous burger chain was once the second largest in America, created the kids' meal before McDonald's made it famous, and somehow ended up with 0 operating restaurants. 4 names on this list are not completely dead. They are coming back, surviving under unusual ownership, or reappearing in forms their original fans never expected. So this is not just a list of closed restaurants, it is a look at chains customers tried to keep alive after corporations had already moved on. Jerry's Hamburgers started in 1962 in Rockford, Illinois, with a connection that made it look less like a coincidence and more like a tiny echo of McDonald's. The chain was launched by Jerry McGee, whose husband, John McGee, had been a vice president at McDonald's during its early expansion years. The restaurants borrowed the fast service playbook that was already changing American roadsides. Jerry's had walk-up windows, a stripped-down menu, low-priced hamburgers, and a cheerful cartoon mascot that fit the same world as McDonald's old speedy-style branding. It was not trying to be a sit-down diner. It was built for speed, price, and repetition. For Rockford and nearby towns, that was enough to matter. Jerry's eventually reached 13 locations, mostly around Illinois and Wisconsin, and for local customers it became part of the landscape. People knew the sign, the burger, and the routine. The problem was scale. While Jerry's stayed regional, McDonald's exploded into a national machine with advertising, real estate power, and operating systems that small chains could not match. The corporate version of Jerry's faded early, but the name did not vanish on schedule. Independent owners kept several restaurants going for decades, long after the chain itself had effectively stopped expanding. The last known Jerry's location held on until 1999, giving the brand a strangely long afterlife for something most of the country never knew existed. Even now, Jerry's survives in memory more than in buildings. Fans still trade stories, collect images of the mascot, and buy Jerry's merchandise, turning a 13-store hamburger chain into proof that local fast food can outlive its own company. Hot Sam Pretzels began in 1966 inside Livonia Mall in Michigan, and its timing was almost perfect. Enclosed malls were becoming weekend destinations, and a soft pretzel fit that world better than a full meal. It was cheap, easy to carry, fast to make, and the smell did half the advertising before a customer even saw the counter. The founder, Julius Young, built Hot Sam around that simple mall impulse. A shopper could buy one without sitting down, without committing to lunch, and without spending much money. For mall landlords, it also made sense. Pretzels did not need a huge kitchen, and the product worked in small spaces with steady foot traffic. By the mid-1980s, Hot Sam had grown to about 175 locations. That made it one of the early names that helped turn soft pretzels into a mall food category before competitors made the space feel crowded. For a while, if you were walking past record stores, arcades, and department store entrances, Hot Sam was exactly the kind of snack stand you expected to find. Its disappearance was not a dramatic failure where customers suddenly rejected the food. It was more of a corporate paper trail. Young sold the company to General Host, and over time, Hot Sam passed through later buyers who treated it less like a founder's brand and more like a piece of a portfolio. Final turn came when Mrs. Fields ended up owning both Hot Sam and Pretzel Time. At that point, keeping 2 similar pretzel chains alive under the same corporate roof made less sense on a spreadsheet. Stores were gradually converted, and the Hot Sam name was erased location by location. By 2005, the remaining Hot Sam stores had been renamed Pretzel Time. The chain that helped define the smell of the American mall did not exactly collapse. It was folded into a sibling brand until the sign was gone. Mighty Casey's was the kind of chain that made perfect sense in Atlanta, and much less sense once you tried to explain it anywhere else. It opened in the early 1980s with a baseball theme, a name pulled from Casey at the bat, and a menu that felt more like a shopping list than a tight fast food concept. Burgers, hot dogs, wings, sandwiches, salads, frozen yogurt, and big portions all lived under one roof. In Atlanta, that was part of the charm. Mighty Casey's was not just selling one signature item, it was selling a local routine. That local loyalty became the chain's biggest strength and its biggest limit. Atlantans knew the brand, knew the buildings, and knew what to order. Outside that market, the name did not carry the same instant meaning, and the oversized menu made expansion harder to control. A restaurant that feels personal in one city can start to feel unfocused when a company tries to copy it in 20 new markets. By the 1990s, the real value of Mighty Casey's was not only the food, it was the real estate. The restaurants already had drive-thrus, parking, kitchens, and locations picked for fast service traffic. For a larger chain, that could be more valuable than trying to build new stores from scratch. In 1994, Crystal bought Mighty Casey's and began converting many of its restaurants into Crystals. The Atlanta brand faded, not because people had forgotten it, but because its physical footprint was easier to reuse than its personality was to export. That is why some older Crystal locations in the Atlanta area have a strange feeling to them. If a building seems a little too big, or the layout feels slightly off for tiny square burgers, you may be looking at the architectural ghost of Mighty Casey's. D. Ritzy's looked like a fast food chain built by someone who missed the old diner but still wanted drive-through speed. It started in Columbus, Ohio in 1980 with chrome, white tile, neon, and a menu that did not feel like the bargain bin version of a burger place. The burgers were thin and cooked on a griddle, the fries were shoestring style, and the ice cream was made in-house. Even the name sounded like it was trying to sell a little polish with the meal. The founder, Graydon Webb, was not guessing his way into the business. He had been a Wendy's executive, so he understood how a modern burger chain was supposed to scale. Ritzy's grew quickly enough to go public, and at its peak, it reached around 90 locations. For a moment, the concept seemed to prove that customers would pay for a fast food place that felt cleaner, sharper, and slightly more premium. The problem was that the 1980s burger wars were moving in the opposite direction. Bigger chains were teaching customers to look for coupons, combo discounts, and 99-cent deals. Ritzy's had better ingredients, house-made ice cream, and a more expensive store design, which meant it could not always fight on price without hurting itself. That left the chain stuck between two markets. It was not a full-service diner where customers expected to pay more and sit longer. It was also not a cheap burger window where price could beat almost everything else. When the economy tightened and competition got more aggressive, Ritzy's costs became harder to hide. The company filed for bankruptcy in the early 1990s. Many locations closed, and some were converted into cheaper burger concepts that were easier to run in a value menu world. But Ritzy's did not disappear completely. A small number of franchise locations survived, keeping the thin burgers, shoestring fries, and ice cream alive for people who remembered the original. D. Ritzy's, one of the rare chains on this list that did not just vanish. It became smaller, older, and harder to find, but not extinct. Pioneer Chicken was not born with a focus group's name or a national expansion plan. It started in Echo Park, Los Angeles in 1961, and its name came from the Pioneer Market nearby. That practical little choice helped make it feel less like a corporate invention and more like part of the neighborhood. The food made it impossible to confuse with anything else. Pioneer's fried chicken had a bright orange batter that looked almost unreal in the box, and for a lot of Los Angeles kids, that color was the brand. The menu also leaned into items that bigger chains usually avoided, including fried gizzards and livers, which gave it a local, old-school feel instead of a polished national one. Then there was Pioneer Pete, the cartoon mascot who showed up on signs, packaging, and ads. Kids' meals sometimes came with comic books, turning a chicken dinner into something closer to a small Saturday afternoon event. In Southern California, Pioneer Chicken was not just competing with KFC. It was tied to car culture. neighborhood shopping centers, and the version of Los Angeles that existed before every corner started looking interchangeable. At its height, Pioneer had hundreds of restaurants, especially across California. But the chain changed direction after founder H.R. Kaufman sold it in 1987. 1 year later, the company filed for bankruptcy, and the brand's future became less about saving Pioneer chicken and more about what could be done with its real estate. Popeyes eventually acquired many of the locations, but that did not mean Pioneer was being rescued. Most of those restaurants were converted, and the orange-battered identity was stripped away one store at a time. For customers who grew up with it, Pioneer did not close all at once. It disappeared block by block. The strange twist is that Pioneer Chicken is both nearly gone and strangely alive. Locations remain, both in Southern California, still serving as edible time capsules for people chasing that exact batter. Overseas, though, the story took a turn nobody would have predicted. In Indonesia, California Fried Chicken grew from a Pioneer-inspired franchise into a major chain with hundreds of restaurants. So while Pioneer Chicken almost vanished in the country that created it, its shadow became much bigger on the other side of the world. Rack's roast beef had the kind of plan that actually made sense on paper. It wanted to beat Arby's by being the more grown-up roast beef chain, with better interiors, a calmer dining room, salad bars, baked potatoes, and a menu that felt a little closer to a casual restaurant than a drive-through counter. For a while, that worked. Rack's grew through the 1970s and 1980s, and by the early 1990s, it had more than 500 locations. The company had a clear lane: roast beef sandwiches for people who wanted fast food, but not the exact same burger and fries routine. Then Rack's started acting like it did not trust its own idea. The menu expanded far beyond roast beef, adding pizza, tacos, pasta, Chinese food, chicken, seafood, and almost anything else that might bring in one more customer. Instead of giving people more reasons to choose Rack's, it made the chain harder to describe. Was it a roast beef place, a buffet-adjacent restaurant, a baked potato bar, or a fast food sampler platter? That identity crisis reached its strangest point in 1992, when Rack's introduced Mr. Delicious. He was an animated, middle-aged spokesman in a suit, but instead of being cheerful and hungry, he was tired, lonely, and weirdly personal. In the commercials, he talked about his divorce, his therapy, his low self-esteem, and his general disappointment with life. The ads were memorable, but not in the useful way. Customers watching television did not come away craving a roast beef sandwich. They came away wondering why a fast food chain had just made them listen to a sad man unpack his emotional baggage. Rack's filed for bankruptcy in 1992, the same year Mr. Delicious appeared. The company was already under pressure, but the campaign became the perfect symbol of a brand that had panicked in public. From a peak of 504 restaurants, Rack's collapsed to only a handful of surviving locations. And before we get to the chains that are actually trying to come back, write in the comments whether you think Rack's failed because of the menu, the ads, or because nobody inside the company could explain what Rack's was anymore. Arthur Treacher's was not built around a cartoon sailor or a made-up mascot. Arthur Treacher was a real British actor, famous in the United States for playing proper English butlers and gentlemen. That made his name perfect for an American chain selling fish and chips with a theatrical version of British charm. The company launched in 1969 with a founding team that included Dave Thomas, before he became famous for Wendy's. The concept was simple and memorable: crispy battered fish, chips, malt vinegar, and food served in newspaper-style wrapping. At its peak, Arthur Treacher's had 826 restaurants, built largely around Icelandic cod, which gave the chain a flaky, mild fish that customers recognized as better than ordinary fast food seafood. Then the economics changed under the chain's feet. In the 1970s, the cod wars between Iceland and the United Kingdom disrupted fishing rights in the North Atlantic. For Arthur Treacher's, the result was brutal. Cod prices nearly doubled. A chain whose whole identity depended on affordable cod suddenly had a signature ingredient that cost far more than its menu was designed to absorb. The second problem was less visible to customers but just as damaging. Arthur Treacher's had used sale-leaseback deals, selling restaurant properties and then leasing them back. That brought in cash during expansion, but it also left the company with heavy rent obligations. When sales slowed and fish got more expensive, those leases became a financial trap. Management tried to protect margins by switching from cod to pollock. On paper, that made sense. Pollock was cheaper and easier to source. In the restaurants, it damaged trust. Franchisees complained that customers noticed the difference, and some operators openly resisted the change. Arthur Treacher's was no longer just fighting high costs, it was fighting its own franchise system. The collapse was not instant, but it was steady. Ownership changed, stores closed, and the brand that once had hundreds of locations shrank to only a few surviving restaurants, most famously in Ohio. The demand for fried fish had not vanished. The company had been hit by a supply shock and a financial structure that left little room to recover. Today, Arthur Treacher's is one of the names attempting a comeback through ghost kitchens and a revival partnership connected to Nathan's Famous. It is not an 800-store empire again, but the brand still has something many dead chains would envy. People remember exactly what it was supposed to taste like. Noggles did not come back because a corporation found an old logo in a filing cabinet. It came back because one customer decided the brand had been abandoned and then proved it. The chain began with Dick Noggle, one of the early partners behind Del Taco. After leaving that company, he opened Noggles in Southern California in 1970. It sold Mexican fast food with an American drive-through rhythm. Tacos, burritos, burgers, fries, and breakfast items, all built for people who wanted something cheap, fast, and filling. The loyalty came from two things customers could describe decades later. First were the macho items, giant versions of burritos and other menu staples that made Noggles feel bigger and messier than the competition. Second was real 24-hour service. In Southern California, that mattered. Noggles became a place for night shift workers, teenagers, club crowds, and anyone hungry when most restaurants had gone dark. By the late 1980s, Noggles had grown into a recognizable regional chain, but its independence did not last. In 1988, it merged with Del Taco. The new ownership kept some locations alive for a while, but the Noggles name slowly disappeared as restaurants were converted. The last Noggles-branded location closed in 1995. For most dead chains, that would be the end of the paper trail. Noggles survived online instead. A fan named Christian Zebarth started writing about the chain on his blog, Orange County Mexican Restaurants. Former customers gathered in the comments, comparing memories of macho burritos, cheese burritos, and hot sauce. The conversations became more than nostalgia. People were trying to reconstruct the food. Then Zebarth noticed something important. If a trademark is not being used in commerce, it can be considered abandoned. Del Taco still had history with the name, but the public could not walk into a functioning Noggles restaurant. Zebarth challenged the trademark and fought for the right to use it. In 2015, he won. That legal victory turned a fan project into a real restaurant revival. Noggles reopened first through test events and pop-ups, then in actual Southern California locations, serving a menu built around the items people had spent years remembering. That makes Noggles different from a normal reboot. It was not revived by market research. It was revived by customers who remembered the food clearly enough to argue over the recipes, and by one fan who turned that memory into a trademark case. Kenny Rogers Roasters had the kind of launch most restaurant chains would pay for, a famous name on the sign and a fast food heavyweight behind the business. The singer Kenny Rogers started the chain in 1991 with John Y. Brown Jr., the former Kentucky governor who had helped turn Kentucky Fried Chicken into a national empire. That pairing made the concept look serious from day one. Rogers brought celebrity trust. Brown brought fast food experience. The timing also helped. In the early 1990s, rotisserie chicken sounded like the answer to fried chicken fatigue. It looked warmer, cleaner, and a little healthier, even if it was still being sold with sides like mashed potatoes, macaroni and cheese, corn muffins, and gravy. The pitch was simple: chicken dinner without cooking chicken dinner. For a while, it worked. Kenny Rogers Roasters grew to more than 350 locations, and it became visible enough to land one of the strangest pieces of sitcom immortality any chain ever received. In a 1996 episode of Seinfeld, a giant Kenny Rogers Roasters sign blasts red light into Kramer's apartment, slowly driving him insane. That episode made the brand unforgettable, which is important because Kenny Rogers Roasters did not fail in America because nobody had heard of it. Awareness was not the hole in the business. The problem was that rotisserie chicken became crowded fast. Boston Market was expanding aggressively. Supermarkets were selling hot rotisserie chickens near the checkout, and Kenny Rogers Roasters needed capital to keep competing. The company filed for bankruptcy in 1998. Ownership changed, locations closed, and the United States footprint kept shrinking until the last domestic Kenny Rogers Roasters restaurant shut down in 2011. Then the story moved overseas. The brand survived in Asia, where its sit-down chicken dinner format found a more durable market. Today, Kenny Rogers Roasters is still a normal restaurant name in places like Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia, India, and Dubai. So, in America, it became a punchline from an old sitcom. In other countries, it never needed to be nostalgic. It just stayed open. Hot and Now was built around a question that sounds almost impossible today. How cheap can fast food get if you remove everything that slows it down? The chain started in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1984, and its original offer was brutally simple. Hamburgers, fries, and drinks were each 39 cents. That price was not a gimmick supported by a giant dining room full of customers. It was the business model. Hot and Now restaurants were tiny. They had no indoor seating, no large lobby, and no attempt to be a hangout. The buildings were designed for drive-through volume, often with 2 lanes moving cars through as quickly as possible. The menu was stripped down so employees could make the same core items over and over without the kitchen getting complicated. That made the chain one of the purest fast food ideas of the 1980s. Low overhead, low prices, fast service, and almost no distractions. Expansion came quickly. Hot and Now grew past 100 locations, then climbed to more than 150 at its peak. For a Midwestern drive-through burger chain, that was a serious footprint, and it looked like the concept had room to travel far beyond Michigan. Then the company ended up inside a much larger machine. PepsiCo bought Hot and Now and placed it under Taco Bell, which already knew how to run inexpensive fast food at scale. On paper, that should have helped. In practice, the changes made Hot and Now less like the thing that worked. The menu expanded. The simple kitchen became harder to manage. Leadership changed. Franchisees complained that support was slipping. A chain designed to win by being small, cheap, and focused was pushed toward a more complicated version of itself. Once the economics broke, the closures came fast. Locations disappeared across the Midwest. Ownership changed hands, and Hot and Now eventually filed for bankruptcy. The chain that had once topped 150 restaurants kept shrinking until only one location was left, in Sturgis, Michigan. That single drive-through became a kind of roadside time capsule. Fans drove hours for olive burgers, cheap nostalgia, and the feeling of catching a brand before it vanished completely. Now Hot and Now is no longer just surviving. In 2024, new owners bought the rights to the name and started bringing it back. New openings have been announced in Wayland Township and Alpena, turning a one-location survivor into an active revival. For most dead fast food chains, nostalgia is the ending. For Hot and Now, it may be the expansion plan. Showbiz Pizza Place did not disappear because people forgot the pizza. It disappeared because the robots belonged to somebody else. The chain opened in 1980 when hotel developer Robert Brock wanted a family entertainment restaurant that could compete with Chuck E. Cheese. Instead of just copying the idea, Brock partnered with inventor Aaron Fechter, whose company, Creative Engineering, had built a full animatronic stage show called the Rock-afire Explosion. That stage show became the reason showbiz lived in people's memories. The Rock-afire Explosion had its own cast, its own songs, and a stranger, more detailed personality than most restaurant mascots were ever allowed to have. There was Billy Bob the Bear, Fats Geronimo on keyboards, Mitzi Mozzarella, Beach Bear, and a whole lineup of characters that turned a pizza restaurant into a mechanical concert. Fechter was not just a supplier dropping off decorations, he was the creative engine behind the thing customers remembered. His company designed the characters, built the animatronics, programmed the performances, and kept control of the intellectual property. He also had a connection to another arcade classic. Creative Engineering helped develop the original Whack-A-Mole game, which became a staple of family entertainment centers. Then the corporate map got weird. In the mid-1980s, Chuck E. Cheese's parent company was struggling, and Showbiz's side of the business ended up buying it. That meant one company now controlled both Showbiz Pizza Place and Chuck E. Cheese. On paper, that solved the rivalry. In reality, it created a licensing problem. The company owned the restaurants, but it did not own the Rockafire explosion characters. Aaron Fechter still held the rights, and the new corporate owners did not want to keep building their main entertainment brand around characters they had to license from someone outside the company. The solution was called concept unification, and it was one of the strangest transformations in fast food history. Instead of simply shutting down Showbiz locations, the company converted them into Chuck E. Cheese restaurants. Many Rockafire animatronics were not removed and replaced. They were physically modified. Costumes changed, faces changed, programming changed. The same mechanical bodies that had performed as the Rockafire explosion were rebuilt to perform as Chuck E. Cheese characters. For customers, it could feel like a restaurant had been rewritten overnight. Billy Bob and his band were gone, but the stage still moved. The building was familiar, the robots were familiar, and yet the identity had been overwritten. By the early 1990s, the Showbiz name was phased out. The company did not vanish through one dramatic bankruptcy or one final closing day. It was absorbed, rebranded, and mechanically converted. That is why Showbiz Pizza Place has a different kind of afterlife than most dead chains. Fans are not just nostalgic for the food or the arcade tokens. They remember a cast of characters that was corporate erased, one animatronic body at a time. Burger Chef was once the chain McDonald's had to watch in its rearview mirror. It started in Indianapolis in 1958, when brothers Frank and Donald Thomas opened a burger restaurant built around speed, low prices, and a flame-broiled cooking system. That flame-broiled pitch gave Burger Chef a different identity from the griddle-cooked burger shops around it, and the chain expanded fast enough to become one of the biggest names in American fast food. By the early 1970s, Burger Chef had more than 1,200 locations. That put it close behind McDonald's and ahead of many burger chains that people now think of as permanent parts of the fast food landscape. For a moment, Burger Chef was not a footnote. It was a national force. Its bigger legacy is what it invented before its competitors made those ideas famous. Burger Chef introduced the Works Bar, where customers could dress their burgers with toppings themselves. That was a major shift at a time when fast food was mostly built around standardized orders moving quickly through the kitchen. Burger Chef also leaned heavily into character branding, with mascots like Burger Chef and Jeff, turning the restaurant into something kids could recognize before they could even read the sign. Then came the fun meal. In the early 1970s, Burger Chef began selling a children's meal with a burger, fries, dessert, a drink, and a toy or prize inside a themed package. It was not just food, it was a complete kid-targeted product, years before McDonald's rolled out the Happy Meal nationally. Burger Chef even tied meals into major entertainment promotions, including Star Wars-style campaigns that showed how powerful fast food and pop culture could become when they were packaged together. The chain had the ideas. The problem was the business behind them. General Foods bought Burger Chef in the late 1960s, and the new ownership pushed expansion hard. Locations multiplied, but the company did not build a strong enough operating system to support that growth. Franchisees struggled with inconsistent stores, uneven management, and competition from chains that were becoming more disciplined every year. Growth became the headline, even when the restaurants underneath it were weakening. In 1982, General Foods sold Burger Chef to Imasco, the parent company of Hardee's. That sale sealed the chain's fate. Hardee's did not need Burger Chef to survive as a separate brand. It needed the real estate, the franchise network, and the usable restaurants. So Burger Chef locations were converted into Hardee's. Signs came down, menus changed. Buildings that had once been part of a national challenger were folded into another company's expansion plan. The last Burger Chef restaurant closed in Cookeville, Tennessee, in 1996. That is what makes Burger Chef the biggest disappearance on this list. It did not vanish because it lacked influence. It vanished after its best ideas escaped the brand. The kids' meal, the self-serve toppings bar, the character-driven promotions, the movie tie-ins. Those pieces lived on across fast food, while the name Burger Chef was stripped from the buildings that created them. Burger Chef is the perfect place to end because its disappearance shows the pattern behind this whole list. Some of these chains truly lost momentum, But many were not simply rejected by customers. They were absorbed in acquisitions, converted into other brands, trapped by leases, hit by supply shocks, damaged by licensing fights, or weakened by decisions made far above the restaurant counter. That is why comebacks are possible. Naugel's Hot and Now, G.D. Ritzy's, and Arthur Treacher-style revivals work because the sign may vanish before the demand does. If people still remember the food, the name, and the reason it felt different, a dead chain can become a live opportunity again. Thank you for watching. Now I want your case in the comments. Write the chain number, then the strongest reason it deserves a real comeback. The best arguments may help shape a future episode.